Hello, CCC family. In my last blog, I said that the gospel has political implications, and therefore, preachers, pastors, cannot avoid teaching and preaching on politics. The God of the gospel, our Creator Redeemer, cares about human flourishing and has some things He wants to say to us in the Bible about our lives as citizens and workers. And although it's not always easy to know how to apply biblical principles to current events and situations in our culture, we're supposed to try. So today, let me try to apply one key biblical text about government to our current COVID-19 crisis. The text is Romans 13, 1 through 7. And I encourage you to read the whole paragraph for yourself. But here's just the first line. Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities. God established government to protect citizens, to promote justice, to safeguard us against foreign aggression and domestic crime. Government is God's idea. And in this broken, sinful world, God knows that even incompetent government, even autocratic government, is better than anarchy. If you want the Bible's assessment on anarchy, look at the last line of the book of Judges, which describes one of the darkest periods in Israel's history. And the line is, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So God expects His people to honor this institution, and our default posture is to be one of submission to governing authorities, even when we disagree with them. But the Apostle Paul, who wrote Romans 13, did not always obey the government. Neither did the Apostle Peter, who wrote something similar to what Paul wrote in 1 Peter chapter 2. When the government told the early church that it couldn't do something her master had commanded her to do, the apostles replied, "We must obey God rather than men." And when the government tried to treat Paul unjustly, he didn't just roll over it and roll over and take it without protest. He insisted on his rights as a citizen. You can read about that in Acts 16 and 22. In other words, Paul was not a Romans 13 absolutist, and neither are we. There may be times when it's necessary for the church to say humbly, reluctantly, but firmly to the government, we cannot honor your directives. How might this posture of default submission within limits apply to our current situation? We'll see if what follows makes sense and commends itself to your conscience. I'll begin with this scenario. The fire marshal interrupts a worship service and says, "Folks, there's a fire in the basement. We have to clear the building immediately." No sensible pastor would stand up in the pulpit and say, "Wait a minute, you can't tell the church what to do." No, we would gladly, orderly evacuate the building, and we would thank God for this branch of government charged with public safety. But now let's suppose that the sheriff wants to close all churches in the county indefinitely, because sometimes church fellowship halls have fires, and at all costs we want to make sure nobody's ever hurt by attending a church service. Well, then we'd have a problem, wouldn't we? When the government said several weeks ago, "Folks, we need to stop large group meetings and cease business as usual because there's a deadly plague upon us and our healthcare system is in danger of being overwhelmed. Millions of people will needlessly die," well, then the churches were right to stop meeting. A clear, present, and serious danger, at least that's how it seemed at the time, time will tell, called for submission to government authority. But suppose the government were to say, we're going to let you distribute food because that's necessary, but not meat for prayer because that's not necessary. Or suppose the government were to say, you can park at Walmart and listen to your radio, but you can't park in the church parking lot and listen to your pastor's sermon on the radio. Or suppose the government were to say, we're going to have to forbid all church meetings for the next year and a half because our incomplete, constantly changing, confusing models tell us that maybe, possibly, a lot of people will get sick if we don't. Well, then we'd have a problem, wouldn't we? We might have to respond with all due respect. You're overstepping your constitutional, God-given authority and encroaching on territory where you don't belong. We might have to say, as a current lawsuit against California Governor Newsom says, quote, "The state does not get to dictate the method of worship to the faithful." If a Californian is able to go to Costco or the local marijuana shop or a liquor store and buy goods in a responsible, socially distanced manner, then he or she must be allowed to practice their faith using the same precautions. End quote. Did you notice that I used the word might in those two sentences? I'm not saying what I think Christ Community Church ought to do right now, much less announcing a decision of our governing board. I'm inviting you to consider what it might look like to honor Romans 13 without being a Romans 13 absolutist. More next time.